Pirate Kings, Pirate Queens, non-binary monarchs of the sea, hello, how we doing? What's going on? We are here. It's time for number 1 in the countdown to OP07. This has been such a fun week making these. If you've been joining the ride, thanks again. If you're new to the channel, here is a little bit about my process for these videos. I have gone through OnePieceTopDecks.com, SecondStorage.com, and Firefist.gg to log every single deck list that either won or topped a tournament in the Asian version of the Set 7 format, put them all into a giant spreadsheet, and assigned each list a point value based on the scale of competition of that tournament, the deck's placing in the tournament, and how far into the format that tournament took place. With that, I've been able to rank each leader as well as come up with a standard topping deck list for that leader, along with some very useful metrics on cost curve, amount of counter, number of 2K counters, non-counter characters, blockers, events, cards with a certain type even, as well as some tech choices and general popularity of cards that got used with each leader. I've also been reading a fair amount of Japanese articles from Note.com and doing some of my own testing to get further insight into these decks and why players made the choices they did, all for the purpose of getting us as ready as we can be for this set once it comes out over here. So thank you again for coming along, welcome to Sakura Kingdom, and let's get into the countdown to OP07. And here we go. This is my favorite character in the entire series, one of my favorite leaders ever printed, the king of OP07, Trafalgar Law. If you've been following the One Piece card game discourse, there is lots of discussion about his performance in OP08 right now. Based on the data I have so far, I could not be in greater agreement that something needs to be done in Asia right now. But as far as OP07 goes, I think we're good to chill for a second. I think that Law is unquestionably the best deck, and is on the edge of being too good, but firmly behind that boundary. This may be a hot take, and I may do some data analysis and maybe make some content if I ever find the time. Haha, we've all heard that one before, to figure out, statistically what the best format is, but this may be one of the best formats that we've had. Anyway, this leader ability has the perfect blend of control and aggro that rewards skillful play and punishes mistakes. So seeing him just barely in that tier 0 by my own metrics really feels relatively good to me. There's only going to be one OP07 card in this data list, but there were some changes to the build after the ban hit. More than almost any other deck, Law relies much more on a holistic understanding of a matchup and reactions to an individual game state than a specific curve to go off of every time. And the Mulligan is no different. We want a nice blend of ramp, reducers, and our other utility cards, our draw, our rush, our blockers, prioritized generally in that order. If we were to distill this into a general Mulligan strategy, you need to have a 3-cost going first, a 4-cost going second, and then you want to get your ramp ASAP to then be able to develop that board and net your advantage. The data gave us a total of 10 power reducers, for each of Gordon, Raise Max, for maximum consistency. For me, it feels better to see one too many than to get caught without them. And Otamo rounds out our suite of 2Ks while still being able to take care of 5Ks without giving the most reduction that we have. Shiraya will always let us block and save him for 1K counter or swing at the opponent's leader, no matter how high it is, which is huge for the Black-Yellow Luffy matchup. In that matchup, he might be more of an attacker than a blocker, since the Egghead Luffy outs him very easily. Chopper gets considerably more play in Set 7 than he did in EB01. His attack effect is the biggest draw here, basically a Gordon or a Raise Max that can swing. Our opponent is going to swing into him almost whenever they can, so in that case he's a pseudo-blocker, but he's also an actual blocker once we get to the endgame. And then our homie, our wonderful friend, Bone Clay, slaps in any matchup with tall characters, and in OP07, that's going to be a lot of them, especially versus yellow and green, and he ramps on play, so he is great to see in our opening hand. And speaking of ramp cards that we love seeing in our opening hand, Ein gets us an extra Don on play, and she swings for 5k. If we play her on turn 2 going second, she will get us to 7 Don turn 3, and that is great for playing a 5-cost kid, then using the leader effect to play a 4-cost, and then having 3 Don left over to play another character. And then if that 4-cost you played off the leader effect is also a ramp card, then you could just play another 4-cost that turn. The control capabilities this deck has are wonderful, but flooding the board is how this deck really wins games. And once that time comes to win the game, Kid and Killer is the game ender, and he is what you're playing around in the mirror. If you see another law across the table, your priority is to get them to 2 life as soon as possible and make sure that they do not get to do that to you first. But the most undisputable card in this deck is Shachi and Penguin from Starter Deck 10. They are the gold standard turn 1. If you see them with Kid, that ramp is just as important as their 2k status, if not more so. Now 4-cost Law is helpful in almost any matchup this format, but shotgunning him immediately in any matchup that isn't Luffy or maybe Enel is tough if you're going to be using your lead ability as well. Keeping enough Don to play multiple characters is paramount, but if you can time him well near the end, that's one of the nuances that sets the really good Law players apart. Reiju gives us longevity and consistency through her card draw, and she's the card that propelled the deck's initial rise, but as I've alluded to, she isn't necessarily our specific mulligan. Seeing cards is great, but the first advantage we want to have is Don, then our board, and then our hand comes after. However, if you are against the Mirror or another purple deck, always be on the lookout for the times when her ability is live, and double check when you're about to put her down. 5-cost Kid is our tsundere bestie, no doubt about that. Getting him out on 5 is always great. It facilitates our resources, but 7 Don is that sweet spot. That way we can play him, use our lead ability, and still have enough Don to get 2 characters out afterward. I mentioned that main pattern at 7 when I talked about Ein, but if he's already out, we could play 4-cost, use our lead ability, generate 1 with him, then play a 4-cost or another 5-cost, or start with a 3-cost, use our leader ability, get 1, play another 5-cost, or reduce one of those characters you play by 1 before the leader ability for a power reducer. As anyone who is already familiar with the deck knows, he is the linchpin of our resource stability. He lets us maintain the Don that we need to get that board advantage that carries us through. Now, historically, I've been a little back and forth on Queen, since he's more of a jack of all trades and sets our Don back when we play him. But with so many decks gearing up to KO 4 costs specifically in reaction to Law, another 5-cost blocker is the way to go. But why stop at a 5-cost 6k blocker when we could have a 3-cost 6k blocker? As long as we have at least 2 fewer Don than our opponent, we can play the set 7 Sanji for 3, then he can swing for 6k, he can block. If we don't choose to play him, he's a 2k counter, and he will bait our opponent's control resources out. In my mind, at least, he is an instant 4-of. The same guidance applies for him as Reiju. Always be conscious of when you can or cannot play him for 3. I personally had a few losses because I either forgot it was 2 less Don or didn't fully think the Don changes in my sequencing through. Learn from my mistakes, or just maybe you won't make them. There's a reason I might be playing an L instead. One notable omission from this list is the 7-cost Ace from set 2. I was quite surprised not to see him in here when I ran the algorithm, but it turns out a majority of these reported tops didn't play him. Of course, since we are picking up from the Japanese meta, it could be a different story. At the same time, who knows what's going to happen in the next couple weeks in Asia? Law could see a crippling restriction or maybe even a ban at this point. Who knows? If we don't assume any changes, Ace could be very useful going into a meta with this much Law emphasis on the bat, so I've also isolated all of the lists that played Ace to put another build together. Of course, Ace does not have Rush when he's played in Law, but if we're playing the Mirror and our opponent has 1 active character and 1 rested character, we can play Ace, reduce both of them, tuck the active, and then hit the rested character with our other bodies. That way, he manages to deplete our opponent's board and potentially their hand resources, and then 7k is one of those really awkward stat lines for the mirror to get around. Knowing how to navigate your opening hand, manage your Dawn, swing at the right time to preserve your board and not just have everything KO'd as soon as they are rested, and then shift between aggression and defense are always crucial. But in a deck with a target on its back, no targeted search, and a variety of approaches to each matchup, he is one of the highest ceiling decks. Any matchup can be favorable, any matchup can crash and burn. It's all going to depend on the player using the deck. But I'll hop off my soapbox, get into these card count stats. For Shachi Penguin, all day, every day. Everybody is on Bone Clay, Kid Killer, and our reducers in some capacity. Kid and the Thin Smokes are almost uniform. Queen, Ein, Shuraya, Otama, and the Blocker Law are all above 70%. And then Chopper's where things start to get a little more subjective. Lots and lots and lots and lots of tech options here. We've already discussed Ace. The 3-cost Rush Zoro is wonderful, but without Sakazuki, he's not as necessary. Kid Killer might be all the rush that we need. Zorojuro is a ramp machine. Just kind of hurts that you have to wait a turn for him. That did not stop people from playing him, though. Some lists featuring Zorojuro saw some very, very high achievements. I feel similarly about Beppo. Lots of potential to generate resources. The on-play is just a little conditional. And then the when attacking is subject to the same disadvantages that Zorojuro has. Some people played the 7-cost Ein from set 7. Conceptually, a very strong tempo play if we are running low on our reducers. I do think there is a big difference between 6k power and 7k power in a format where Law is the best deck, though. Promo Reducer Law, great card, in my opinion. I think he just got bumped out by some other slots we have. I could see a copy of Radbeamer 2 depending on your own playstyle preferences, depending on what matchups you're running into in your own meta. It's not something I'm putting in my first draft of the build, but I think there is potential there. Miss All Sunday is in line with the priorities I mentioned earlier on, and if I'm being honest, come on, the cowboy hat, come on. But if I'm adding more 5-cost characters, I'd rather max out Queen before I put her in. She doesn't have counter, she's not a blocker, she doesn't have as much flexible use beyond her on-play effect. I think set 7 Chopper's on-play effect is wonderful for this deck in particular. Just now we're seeing a bunch of mirrors. He's going to be on the bottom of the deck immediately. 2-cost Sanji was the bane of my existence anytime I ran into this matchup as Enel. So if you are in an Enel heavy meta, slot a couple of him in. Wonderful. Otherwise, he might not be as necessary. Kamazo does swing for 5. I guess if you're seeing a lot of Zoro in your meta, or if Black Yellow Luffy is for some reason routinely leaving their 2-cost kids out, I don't know. I'm trying to find I'm trying to justify him as best as I can, so I'm not so negative on these pages. Actually, if black decks are not as worried about Law and they're going hardcore into those Rebecca plays, Fire Fist is still a great option for that. Also is perfect math to reduce an ace, so there's the case for that card. I'll say that Outlook the Third is pretty novel. Sort of like a mini ace against decks that run a lot of 5Ks, so the Mirror and Moria, if that's relevant for you. If you do want to go for a more Heart Pirates build, then the 3-cost Law can search those out. A lot of lists have cut Beppo, though, so he's only so consistent. And then I'd say that Morley and Brook are both pretty cheeky mirror techs to either get around blockers or to soften up multiple characters. Maybe I'll have some fun try them out. We'll see. For the cuts and additions, Chopper is very much a flex spot in this deck, as well as the 4-cost Law. You can also shave down the Shiraya, the Otama, or the Sanji, depending on how you're feeling. And for our additions, we can max out Queen, add more Otama, more 4-cost Law, bring Ace into the picture, Zorojuro, Rush Zoro, or the Miss All Sunday. Those are the first 10 additions that I had from the data, but I will not pretend that this deck is set in stone. And there's my guy, Trafalgar Law number 1 in the countdown to OP07. As I alluded to in the Anel video, he is one of my main picks for this format. It just depends on how further testing goes. The concept makes sense, but this is not an easy deck. I personally only have so much time to get the reps in, so I might go with the comfort pick. If I get time. I feel like I'm always saying if I get time, but if I get time, he might make an appearance. But thank you so much for joining me on this countdown to OP07. Very glad to be talking about these. If you enjoyed, then please like the video or share your own thoughts with me below. I do plan to get one more video out, the big compilation of all these profiles, as well as my thoughts and analysis of the format as a whole. So if you would like to see that, if you would like to get a notification when that comes out, feel free to subscribe. Again, always appreciative, and thanks for everyone who has helped me get through this week and get this content out. As much as I love it, it can tire me out, but knowing there's people who enjoy it keep me going. So thank you again. This is Sakura Kingdom. I'm going to make some sweet, sweet grass for y'all to peruse in that big video, and I'll see you soon.